Can you hear me okay? Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the Capital Formation panel, and appreciate our 4 panelists here who are joining us this afternoon for a discussion. All 4 are investors of different type in terms of private companies, public companies, stage of companies, and we think we'll give a great discussion in terms of how they see innovation, how they invest in innovation across life sciences, and specifically today with respect to gene and cell therapy. I'm going to first have them each individually introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into the discussion and certainly welcome any questions from the audience through the app that we can ask them. Shelley?
Hi guys, Shelley Chu. I lead biotech investing at Lightspeed Ventures. Lightspeed is a broad venture fund with over $10 billion in capital under management. And within the biotech realm, we invest from seed to late stage public companies. Physician scientist by training.
Hi, I'm Steve Knight. I'm managing partner of a group called F Prime, which the easiest way to think about it is as Fidelity's venture group. We manage just under $4 billion. It is mostly in life sciences, but we also have a healthcare IT and services, and then a tech investing group as well. We invest through starting with company formation and seed and Series A, and we invest around the world in China, India, and in Europe. And my training originally is as a physician.
Great. Hey, it's Adam Koppel. Honor, pleasure to be here. Thanks to Mass General Brigham and Bank of America for driving this. I am an investor at Bain Capital, the Life Sciences Fund, and we're also about $5 billion assets under management, and we invest in growth equity up through public market, and entirely focused on the life sciences. So spent a good deal of time thinking about cell and gene therapy.
Hello everyone, Daniel Krizek from Surveyor Capital, which is part of Citadel. Biotech investor as well. Thanks for having me here. Great to see a lot of familiar faces. So we invest across the continuum of a biotech company's life cycle, from Series A through B, C, IPO, public companies, pipes. And we're focused on companies that are based on latest breakthroughs in science, out of which cell and gene therapy has been a meaningful portion of. Pleasure being here.
Good. Thank you, Daniel. So the first question I'll pose to Adam, and that is, we've seen the pace of innovation across gene and cell therapy accelerate dramatically in the last decade, and we're hearing a lot about that over the course of this conference, and certainly the advancements that we're seeing in terms of new therapies being developed, patients being treated, and here locally in the Boston economy, the proliferation of new companies. All 4 of these panelists, their job is to commit capital, investors. And so starting first, Adam, with you, as you look at the field of gene and cell therapy, and again, looking forward, where do you see the most compelling opportunity for your portfolio? And I'll have you start.
Sure. No, obviously it's an extremely exciting area to deploy capital in cell and gene therapy, and we are active in the space. We have been over the recent years, and we will continue to be. I'd say what the opportunity is rich here in cell and gene therapy, but there are also a lot of complexities and a lot of pitfalls for investors. And so what we look for is obviously the exciting opportunity, a way to differentially address unmet medical needs. And there are a lot of true unmet medical needs which cell and gene therapy can uniquely address. But we also look to make sure that the companies where we're allocating capital understand the complexities, understand the differences from typical drug development, and are prepared to navigate those uncertainties. And some of those things include, it's one thing to understand the biology and the theoretical biology of how a potential therapeutic is going to work, but it's another thing to actually translate that into the human condition. The human body is obviously very complex, and certain things that work hypothetically or work in tissue culture, or even in animal models, don't always translate into the human condition. So we are very focused both on companies that recognize this and companies that have projects that are able, that we think are able to have a cleaner translation to humans. And that involves really understanding distribution, delivery, which is complicated, understanding of the manufacturing. I see in previous discussions there's been a lot made of the scale and how clean and pure something needs to be. That's an important thing. And the third thing I'll say is that is pretty unique to this space, which we're very focused on here, is the need for the balance sheet. And what I mean by the balance sheet is these are companies that are going to need a lot of capital to get to a key value creating event. Probably more so than in a lot of other technologies and a lot of other areas. And it's really important for us to make sure we identify situations and management teams that are raising the right amount of capital to have on their balance sheet to enable them to get to true value creating events. So those are probably the three things that we're most focused on. But we are quite optimistic, and we do continue to plan on allocating capital to cell and gene therapy.
Good, thank you.
Maybe dovetailing off that last comment, Shelley, I'll direct this to you. You know, over the last couple of years, we've had a robust amount of capital raised for companies across the life sciences sector, including cell and gene therapy. From your perspective, and some of the companies and portfolios that you're around, what are some of the key lessons you would glean from the last 2 years? And then, as you think about, as a second part, advising some of your CEOs and fellow board members around kind of capital raising timing. When what types of investors to approach during the process. What's kind of advice you have for that?
Sure, great question. So I think in the last 2 years, and especially in the last 6 months, the real lesson obviously is to take the capital when it's available. I've certainly seen CEOs that have refused capital because it was not at a high enough valuation for them and now have lived to regret it. So I think that is the number one lesson. I think, echoing what Adam said, make sure that this capital that you're taking in will take you to one or more value inflection points. And I really do think that's quite important in the gene and cell therapy area, where it could be, the manufacturing cost is more. And so you really need to have enough capital, or it could be that partners are they'll wait later to make that partnership with a little more validation in this space. So I think those are two very important points.
Steve and Daniel, thoughts from you in terms of Shu's question on funding models and advice to your portfolio companies?
Well, again, second or maybe third, the balance sheet comment. Certainly in this area, and by the time we get to editors, and these are incredibly complex nano machines that we really don't completely understand yet, and so you need that balance sheet when not only for manufacturing, but also there are going to be lots of bumps along the road here, and I think that this is something it has and will continue to have a dramatic effect on our ability to cure human disease, but it's going to take a lot longer, like almost everything that we do that's really exciting and cool. It's going to take a lot longer than we think at any particular point in time.
Maybe picking up on a question that Shu had and a theme in around gene and cell therapy, and that is the manufacturing component of it. And Adam, you spoke about the capital intensity of doing that, unlike small molecule or even large molecule biologics. So as you think about your portfolio investments and the decision for companies to build and retain manufacturing capabilities, capacity, scale ultimately through development and commercialization versus finding a partner and having a partner lead those efforts. Again, the what do we keep, what do we partner dynamics, not just relevant for manufacturing, but other aspects of the drug development and commercialization process, but unique to life sciences. So how do you, and again, question to other panelists, how do you go about advising and thinking about that topic for your portfolio companies? Please.
Well, look, it's a conundrum in cell and gene therapy, the question around manufacturing, because in some ways, the process is the drug, right, is the therapy, much more so than in most other parts of life sciences, small molecule, antibody, proteins, even to a certain extent nucleic acid. But the idea of gene therapy and the vectors associated with gene therapy and cell therapy and the manipulation of the cells, be it allo or auto, really that process of the manufacturing is the drug. It is where the strategic value comes from these companies. But at the same time, it's not really always feasible for each company that has a great idea or a technology or is addressing a particular disease. It's not always feasible for them to outright own their own manufacturing infrastructure, capabilities, know-how, both from the process development perspective and from the scalability perspective. So although, and that's the conundrum, it's probably the area where there's the most value in manufacturing versus other parts, but yet an area where it's the most challenging for companies, especially smaller companies that are in their development stage and are building out their balance sheets. It's probably the least practical for them to be able to truly own it. So therefore, you would suggest, and I do, sitting on boards or being an investor, looking at these companies, I do think this is one where scale really does matter, and it may not always make sense to own your own manufacturing, but identifying the CDMOs or some of the larger players and getting access to their manufacturing, both from a know-how process development and clearly also from a scalability. And that goes back to the balance sheet question. I mean, I always say to companies, especially today, especially what's gone on in the last 2 or 3 quarters, the value of having a balance sheet is more valuable than the cost to getting that balance sheet. And in the past, companies and boards were so focused on their own internal dilution, and they kind of tried to play things pretty cute. But now when you're in a capital market like we are now, you know, the issues of not having that sufficient balance sheet to execute makes your ultimate cost of capital much higher than you were trying to avoid before. So the value of a balance sheet is worth far more than the cost of getting that balance sheet. And then the last point, when we talk to our management teams and the companies, especially because of the capital intensity of the manufacturing and the uncertainty, the regulatory uncertainty that we're in, and the uncertainty around how many patients and for how long do you have to follow patients and so forth, we tell them to be very careful with their capital allocation. Because once you get that balance sheet, that is oftentimes your most valuable asset. So don't misspend the balance sheet. Make sure that you're working on the right projects, and that you are also working on the right elements, the right bottleneck elements to bring that project, make sure that project is successful and comes to market. That's the advice we give, and manufacturing is part of that, but it's not the only part.
Got it. Adam, a good point on the balance sheet, and Daniel, maybe I'll direct this question to you, just given how avid you are at both the public and private markets making investments. As you look at the current market environment, we've seen it kind of become a lot more turbulent over the course of the last year, both macro factors and micro factors impacting the sector. As you put your investor lens on and you think about what are some of the key observations that you're seeing with respect to the marketplace today, how is that impacting companies' ability to expand that balance sheet to fund a lot of these innovative opportunities? And how is that, what are you seeing in terms of cost of capital impacts as well?
So what is going on the market? That's not a surprising question. A lot of things are going on over the last couple of quarters. Some people have called current environment the nuclear winter of biotech in terms of financing. So first of all, the context, right? We have NASDAQ Biotech Index of public companies down over 50% from the peak, almost 60, which was February 2021. Obviously negative performance this year, overall last year also. And a couple of key reasons what is going on. The obvious ones would be obviously macro, as you mentioned. Inflation expectations, interest rates going up. Given most of the biotech companies won't have any revenues or profits, until 5 to 10 years from now, they are obviously fairly sensitive to discount rates. So that's one factor. Sort of a risk on, risk off. We have war in Ukraine and things like that, so that there's an impact there for sure as well. Now, I think the most important thing is actually more biotech specific. Let's look at what happened in 2020. We had COVID, and that made biotech fairly popular in the second half of 2020, as biotech was seen as kind of saving the world with vaccines. A lot of funds raised a lot of money. A lot of funds had really great performance and raised money based on that. So 2020 is great. That fueled a period of a lot of positive things, a lot of IPOs, a lot of financings in early 2021 at very high valuations. Now, many of these companies later, private companies, later went public and had to sort of honor the previous financings valuations, right? And and then once interest rates and inflation and these high valuations all sort of coincided, IPOs stopped working. A lot of companies went down. A ton of investors reduced exposure, and some investors disappeared overall. People always talk about specialists in biotech and then the sort of the generalists and retail, right? That kind of disappeared. So all of this combined led to what's going on right now. So I see it as a pendulum just swinging one way and then sort of another way. Now, so where are we now? We have over 100 companies publicly traded with zero or negative enterprise value, meaning their market cap is under their cash. And at the same time, we have a ton of companies on the private market that were either looking to go public or raise more money. Now many of them postponed their IPO, and many of them also postponed their private financings. That's just temporary, might change very quickly as it has in the past. Companies still have a ton of options. Private companies can finance themselves privately from insiders, small rounds just to kick the can down the road. A lot of companies have done that in the past. Companies can partner with large pharma that's flush with cash. Companies can go public through SPACs. We have about 500 SPACs looking for their targets and running out of time. So there's options. On the public market, companies need to raise money as well. They don't have to just do sort of straight equity through a secondary offering. There's a pipe market with convertible debt or other instruments. Reverse mergers, where those private companies seeking capital can reverse merge into those private companies with cash that are in the penalty box. So still options. One thing I'd say, even we're in so-called nuclear winter. Number one, that can change very quickly. Number two, a lot of these companies are not fundamentally impaired. The science is very sound across many of them, and going forward very, very, very strong with new advances.
Terrific. Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate that. And we're getting a lot of questions here from the audience. So I think sticking with that theme, one of the questions that's being asked is the current macro and biotech factors have made capital formation more challenging in biotechs. What are some of the key factors that may drive a return to normalcy? I don't know. Stephen, do you want to start, and then you can pass it around?
Key factors that
Key
will
factors that will help us
normalcy?
return to normalcy.
Oh, wow.
Looking for you to get your
if you
crystal
knew
ball.
that,
Yeah,
could
if
be
I
a welcome amendment.
Yes. Yeah, I wouldn't be sitting here if I knew that. I mean, some of us are, I don't know how many, but at least I am old enough to have seen, the biotech nuclear winter at least twice before. And I think we've had an offsite since, in our annual offsite, which we're having again this week, there is, since 2012, there was one particular younger partner who had a slide that would come up in a discussion of the public markets, and it said, when is the party going to be over? And that was true all the way through until, I suspect it'll be different this year. But I think things end when they end. I think, as Daniel was just saying, I think that the valuations, arguably were too high. I think there's something that's also different. or at least I believe that this is true, is that at least since the time I was in medical school, which was a long time ago, there has been a secular change in this way. There weren't a lot of things that we truly cured, 35, 40 years ago. The surgery, infectious disease is certainly around antibiotics and hypertension and a few other things. But oncology was a terrible place. I mean, at least when I did my rotations, it was really hard. I think that we are on the verge of doing some of those things, and I think that there is general enthusiasm and ability for this industry to significantly reduce human mortality and morbidity. But it's hard and it takes time. So people will get overexcited during periods, and then things like low interest rates and all of those other macro things, which I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about, but they do affect things. And things will come back, and in the meantime, we just have to keep our heads down and do the hard work of creating great companies and focusing on allocating capital in these leaner times appropriately, so that we continue to have drugs and therapies that are helping patients. And I think, so I don't know when it will end, but it will end at some point. At least I'm very confident of that. And it will, at that point, there'll be something else that's really exciting, and people will get overexcited about it, and we'll go through this all over again. That's not a way of answering the question.
No,
I apologize for dodging it.
I think the comfort I take in that answer is that you're saying, despite the fact that we are in this quote-unquote nuclear winter, you're still open for business, you're still looking to deploy capital. There's still lots of areas of innovation where you would have interest in putting money to work. And really it's going to boil down to flexibility around valuations and timing and different things that will allow you to enable that to happen.
No, I think, and as Adam had commented me just when we were waiting to come up here, it's a particularly good time in some ways for to deploy capital if you have capital. So if you don't, it's a good time to be careful about it, depending on the company.
Daniel, you wanted to add something?
Sure. So one thing about the pendulum swinging, one way and then another, and nuclear winter, we've seen that many times just in the last 10, 12 years. Just to when we look back, look at what happened in obviously 2008, 2009, and then sort of reversal through 2010. Then in biotech, look at 2015. Someone tweeted something about drug pricing. Took down the whole biotech, if you remember. I know very well who it was, unfortunately, and took the whole biotech down very quickly, right? Then December 2018, biotech index at similar levels as today, very quickly, and then came back very quickly. March 2020, COVID, similar levels, very quick reversal. Now we're in 2022. So these things happen maybe even more often than people want to remember, and then they reverse.
The reason for the cycles, you did talk about cycles, and you both mentioned it, and I'm an extremely excited investor right now. I mean, we and this comes from something I learned from my mom, who said, when you're most confident, that's when you should be sleeping less well at night, and when you're most stressed, that's when you should be sleeping really well at night, right? Like when the markets are really high, something negative is bound to happen, and when the markets are low right now, there's ample opportunity out there. So this is the time, if you're looking to invest capital into areas like cell and gene therapy and other biotech now, this is the time to be looking at it, because A, there's less competition, there's more of a room to create alpha. B, the valuations are lower, so your room to be wrong is more, your upside downside is much greater. But also, to directly answer the question, what will make this stop? There are the cyclical macroeconomic factors that certainly could make this stop. But I would say there's two fundamental things that we look for to having this turnaround. And the first is the obvious one. We need good data. right? We need good data. And there's been a lot of stories out there. In my fund, we call them the cartoons, right? The companies that go out and raise money on a couple pages of cartoons with some molecular biology, but no real human data. And there's a lot of hope and hype, but it doesn't necessarily always translate. The complexity of translating into humans. And a lot of the data that has come out in the last 6 to 10 months has just not been positive. The hypotheses haven't worked. And that has disappointed investors. And when you have generalist investors or tourist investors that aren't used to looking at that clinical data, that gets them spooked, and then they leave. But when we start seeing some of the clinical data come through positively, that will really turn the market. And the second thing, and I think it's aligned with that, is, and everyone's waiting for this, but is M&A, right? It's the fact that really the ultimate owners of a lot of the innovation in life sciences are the 15 or 20 large global biopharmaceutical and medical device companies. These are the companies with true scale global sales and marketing, manufacturing, distribution. These are the ultimate owners. And really they have not, especially in cell and gene therapy, with only a couple of exceptions, they have not been very active players in the space. And so everyone's waiting for the larger companies to become more involved. And that does lead to ultimate exits, that leads to liquidity, and then what the funds do is redeploy that liquidity to the next stage of companies. And there has not been a lot of that. And we can debate why that is, and we can debate what the actual impact will be, but until the market sees more M&A and until the market sees more fundamental success in humans, I think we may be in this position for a little while.
So this morning we had an interview with Commissioner Kayla from FDA, and he spoke about priorities in his tenure, rare disease, as well as the use and continued use of the accelerated approval pathway, both very relevant for the world of gene and cell therapy. We all work in a regulated industry. FDA, as he described it, is a referee administering the playbook that Congress establishes. As you think about your investments in the gene and cell therapy space, and again, you commented on the data point and there being a setback or number of setbacks with respect to data, some of that being a result of safety setbacks in a space, again, with incredible amounts of innovation, and with that comes risks. How are you today viewing the regulatory environment? Let's focus here on the U.S. Is it constructive in a way of giving your portfolio companies enough in the way of guidance and a framework for pushing drugs through the clinic and ultimately commercialization? If not, where are there areas that need to be addressed to ultimately bring products forward? Stephen?
I'll learn not to look at the speaker. I think, I think especially in the last decade, the FDA has done a wonderful job of working with companies. Now, it's a personal view, and I think has taken some risks itself. You mentioned rare disease a couple of times, and I think that, look, if you're screwing around with the blueprint of life in humans, you ought to be careful. And so I think that those, as Adam was saying, good data is going to trump everything else. And the fact is that we're still relatively early fiddling around with these nanomachines, and that are editors and placing in correct genes through gene therapy. It's going to take a little bit of time, and I personally think that that in most cases the FDA is willing to work with companies and is appropriately concerned. There are lots of individual. We once had a therapy that now is tafamidis, that was an early rare disease drug that missed its endpoint by one patient on an ITT basis who went off to transplant and didn't get approved, and we were outraged, and we thought it was approved in Europe. But I think that there is a part of regulatory science where you have to put the regulation where you have to put the bar somewhere, and people, you end up having to adhere to those rules. And hopefully we'll learn as we go new ways of constructing clinical trials and work with the agency. But I for one, am generally positive, especially in the last 10 years. So that's one person's view.
Generally, I've been actually very impressed by FDA, and I continue to see them as a group of extremely smart, logical, and reasonable people who follow data as scientists. When you look at the number of successes versus the number of controversies over the last decades, the number of controversies, there's very few of them, which we can argue. I think that many of the occasional hiccups or things that people wonder about or question, that's actually, I'd argue, fault of the companies, not FDA, but companies trying to be too aggressive sometimes. And I have multiple experiences of talking to let's say private companies when I evaluate investments, and to a question, how did the pre-IND meeting with FDA go? The answer is it went great. FDA agreed on everything. They are hugely supportive. And then later on, I get my hands on the actual minutes from that meeting that companies upload in the data room. And the minutes will say that FDA disagrees with the approach, doesn't understand or agree with the endpoints, and generally is not supportive. And this disconnect is very common, and it has a lot to do with management teams of biotech companies sort of seeing everything through rosy glass and drinking their own Kool-Aid. Of course, they have to, but that's where I think most of the disconnect comes from. If people really listened and debated with FDA what the trial design is and the endpoints and everything else, and just follow the science, that's the solution, really.
Shelley?
Yeah, I'll just add, I think now with 6 approved cell therapies, the FDA's path has been pretty well laid out for those of you who are starting new companies to follow. So I don't think that's really the rate limiting step here for progress in this industry. I think it's really the iterations on cell therapy and gene therapy, getting into solid tumors, allogeneic therapies, et cetera, which is really what we're looking for as the next innovation.
Good.
And maybe sticking with the theme of making investments and evaluating a company, how much value do you place on the idea and the innovation, and how do you compare that to the team and leaders of the organization bringing that innovation to market? I don't know, Shelley, if you want to start with that question, and then we'll go down the panel.
Sure. I think as Adam started out this panel, I think for me, it's equal weighting of the team. Do they really understand R&D? Second, with the idea, is it a true innovation or is it just iterative? And sometimes it can be iterative if it's going to address a larger commercial market or unmet need. But I think we're really looking for step function changes. And then third, with this capital raise, is there going to be a value inflection point? So those are the 3 key points I look for at every investment.
Oh yeah, no, I can. Yeah, I would. Shelley laid it out very well. I happen to be a particular sucker for really cool innovation. So, I wouldn't say sometimes. I'd say that those correlate often with really good people. When they don't, you gotta wonder what you're missing. But in general, and especially now, something that we've underscored a number of times, the amount of capital that's being raised. I think that incremental stuff is rarely good enough unless you have gobs of money and just a killer management team. It really is those step functions that Shelley just referred to.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone's saying. There are the 3 things you look for when you make an investment: the assets, the management team, and the balance sheet to execute on the strategy. But I do put management team first. I think in my years of investing, which now has gone over 2 decades, embarrassingly, I still don't do it all that well all the time. But management teams are the key. I think partially what you just said, which is oftentimes with good management teams, that's where the good assets tend to attract the best management teams. I think Daniel said something really critical, and I've learned this lesson over and over again. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a team that said, oh, we just met with the FDA, and they love what we're doing. They're pushing us, like, we're all systems go. And then you read the minutes, or unfortunately, you read the press releases after there's a mishap, and you're like, wow, that's not exactly what they said. So, being able to trust a management team, and not just trust a management team that they're telling you the truth, it's that a management team actually understands the truth, right? It's not like they're overtly trying to deceive you, although that happens at times. It's more so the case that they just don't have the experience, or they don't know. And so I think that it is extremely challenging to invest behind a mediocre management team or a team that has not shown you clearly what the plan is, how they're allocating capital prospectively, and they should tell you the potential pitfalls, right? You always want to be wary of a management team, as Daniel again was alluding to. Everything's good, nothing to look at here, rosy-colored glass. Like you've really got to look for a management team that starts with the issues, that says, yes, we're really excited about this, but we're concerned about A, B, and C, and here's how we're going to navigate A, B, and C. But then once we get there, we're extremely excited about D, E, and F. But you've got to help us first navigate A, B, and C. Those are the management teams that we want to invest behind.
One thing I'd add is, so yes, of course, we're looking at super interesting science plus management team that can build a company and execute, that we can trust, that we like. So that we all agree on that. Now the issue here is that science has been moving with Moore's law, but management teams have not. There's a lot more science, a lot more interesting science than the people who can execute. The growth rates are different here. When you look at the number of scientific papers published every year, when you look at the number of, within, for example, oncology, number of different cancers and biomarkers and targets we have, that's all growing exponentially. Management teams are not growing exponentially, which is why when you look at most of the biotech companies today, we have first-time CEOs, first-time management teams that have not done that before, that are learning on the go. And so that's obviously a consideration as well.
And Daniel, picking up on that, again, explosion in new companies, a lot of first-time management teams. So is there ultimately an imbalance where there are too many companies, that companies need to come together, as Adam spoke about, the importance of capital and sizable balance sheets. And is there logic in companies coming together to share the resources more effectively? And again, as you think about this across your portfolio and in a world where there's growing risk and ultimately what you become as a commercial stage company, if you get to that point, how do you think about that in the context of your portfolio companies?
So two different views on this. Are there too many companies? I'd say not necessarily, because there's a lot more interesting science that companies could work on right now, and that science would find capital as well. There's plenty of money in the world, so from this perspective, no, there's not nearly enough companies. On the other hand, from just the people's perspective, could be the case that there's you have to look at the quality, and experience. Is there plenty of experienced management teams? No. Is there plenty of people that could learn and be great? Yeah, sure. Can there be a temporary disconnect? A lot of science, a lot of companies, not enough experienced management teams, leading to temporarily more failures or misunderstandings? Sure, that's possible too. That's just part of the whole cycle and development. I'd say one thing I always think about is what if many years, many decades ago, NIH budgets were much larger and we funded a lot more of everything. Maybe we would have sequenced human genome 5-10 years earlier. Maybe we had immuno-oncology 10 years earlier. Maybe we would have cured most of the cancers by today. and there would be more companies, more people, more science, right? The opposite is true too. If we cut budgets and pricing and everything 20, 30, 40 years ago, maybe we'd still be treating most cancers by chemo, and we'd be about to sequence a human genome and whatnot. So, it's very relative, how you look at it. I think that the funding and government funding of really, science, that's where it starts. And then, science gets invented and people are involved, later as a consequence.
I do think there are too many companies. I think the proliferation we've seen in the last 5 years of way too many, there's too much capital's come into the system too quickly. It was too easy to raise capital. It was too easy to go public. I think there's a proliferation of companies. I think companies are really projects. They're not really full companies. And I think the amount of wasted capital that's going to having a C-suite in every company, it costs $8 to $9 million a year just to be public, regardless of creating any value whatsoever. And there was this period of time, it was the graduation, just get public. Like, that was your goal, was to get public. When in reality, going public is just is this a path to raising capital? It's not really any sort of new graduation. So I think there's too many companies, I think there's too many public companies. I think in some ways they're not doing a lot. They're a lot of times individual projects, and I think there could be capital preservation in the system if you see some smart, strategically motivated consolidation, even SMID, like small and mid-sized companies consolidating, getting a couple of really strong management teams that are working closely with the FDA and the EMEA, working closely with payers, working closely with the key opinion leaders, the physicians, the hospitals like Mass General and Brigham to actually do the studies. I think that will create more value. And I'm just gonna slightly disagree with one thing that my great friend Daniel said, is that I don't always think that more capital in a system leads to faster proliferation of innovation. In fact, I would say you can also see an argument for Darwinian application of capital. And in times of when capital is more constrained, you may actually see smarter capital allocation and more focused view on getting the right things done. And actually, I think sometimes with too much capital, if bad projects are going, it may be leading the fields down incorrect avenues, which could delay fields. I mean, I know I'm going to sound controversial, but with the news today, and I think it was asked before, I think that we didn't necessarily go down the right path in Alzheimer's disease as a community. And I think there was a lot of capital that went into it, and it may not have gone into the right direction. So I think at times, having constrained capital can be a blessing to driving innovation.
So I just wanted to echo that. I think with 350 cell therapy companies, private or public, and over 1,000 clinical trials going on in cell therapy, I actually think there may be a little bit too much, because each one of those doing something innovative, I think that's questionable. On the flip side, I did want to say everyone at one point has to be a first-time CEO, a first-time CSO, a first-time CMO. So I think it's really not, I mean, of course I love to back very experienced management teams, but it's not that they have to have done this 3 times and sold their previous companies for $2 billion. It's that they have to have the awareness of not just what they know, but what they don't know, and that they can share that with the board so the board can help complement those skill sets. I think that's what we're really looking for in management teams.
Good. Well, I think we are out of time. So first off, I want to thank the 4 panelists for joining us this afternoon. Great discussion. We appreciate it. Thank you, MGB, for hosting it, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.